Chapter 4 focuses on socialization and the way in which socialization leads to a construction of social reality. As a working definition, consider socialization to mean the process by which somebody becomes a functioning member of society. So, to become functioning means, at least according to the author, internalizing values, beliefs, and norms of a given society. So the idea here is that the rules, formal and informal, a person acquires allows that person to do that. By the time someone has gotten to college, of course, those rules have been successfully internalized so that people can understand their respective roles when they are engaging in a classroom environment. There are limits, however, to socialization. For one thing, people aren't blank slates. Understanding that there is something about individuals to begin with might suggest that the process of socialization is not pure. Think about it this way. We have a certain amount of human nature, but that the human nature is itself going to be stunted if it's not otherwise developed. You have an example that's mentioned in the text where we have somebody who would be called a feral child today, who suffered from the lack of socialization. The effects of this were so damaging that this particular child did not overcome them in life. A similar study was done, or a study was done shortly after World War II in Romania, where a number of orphan infants were kept in an orphanage. These children all had decent shelter and were fed well enough, but they weren't socialized. And amongst other things, observers noted the same kind of limitations as the child mentioned in the anecdote in our text. Pretty clearly, the process of socialization takes this innate capacity that people have and allows them to become human. So let's consider some of the theories of socialization. Perhaps the most simple of the theories presume that there is a division between an individual and another. So to start with, we're going to have to see the development of the self. That becomes the building block for being able to distinguish between the individual and society. A sociologist by the name of Charles Horton Cooley talks about the looking glass self. And from Cooley's perspective, the theory suggests that our sense of perception, our perception of ourselves, is based upon what we believe others see in us. George Herbert Mead, another sociologist, talks about the generalized other, where an individual learns that there are certain expectations of a person to be part of a member of society, that these expectations will be tailored to a number of different situations. By understanding this, a person will be capable of being able to orient in a number of situations, even to the extent that these will be new types of situations. The person will have not just practice with specific scenarios, but a set of tools for adapting to new situations. So, especially in children, you might see more prominently the practice of role-playing as much to develop a sense of identity based on the roles being played, as to also hone the raw skills or abilities to be able to adapt to new types of situations. How does socialization come about? Not surprisingly, the family is the first unit of socialization. Consider then parents whom we might characterize as middle class, that they might engage in so-called concerted cultivation. So this means engaging in certain types of formal activities, talking with children in a way that gets them to pay attention to their talents and to become responsible caretakers for those talents. Ultimately, the idea is to reinforce a sense of accomplishment that these children will develop confidence because they will have received the kind of feedback that values their experiences. At least according to the author, you contrast what middle-class parents would do with so-called working-class parents who presume that children are better able to manage unstructured time and to let them figure out the process of structuring. If families are the first place, and it's not a surprise considering the amount of time, of course, a child spends with a family, then consider schools. Besides the traditional reading, writing, and arithmetic, there's also an opportunity to be able to engage in social interaction, teaching sharing, for example, practicing patience by learning how to sit at a desk, learning social skills such as taking turns, problem-solving skills for when to engage in conflict resolution, and manners, such as figuring out when to speak and when not to speak. This may be a place where we end up seeing opportunities for social inequality being perpetrated. For example, when you look at placement in an exclusive school, especially because the child's one or both of the child's parents came from that particular school so that they are legacies, you'll see that these children carry on or receive the same benefits that their parents did. This may sound familiar because when we talked about the theories of C. Wright Mills, he described the idea of the power elite, which is exactly this, that people are able to make connections with one another because of familial experiences with the same setting, and because of this, we'll see that these children end up being socialized with one another with a kind of culture in its own right. School can also provide a forum where we see individuals from different classes interacting, and so that the interactions end up mirroring how things will play out in society between the interactions or among the interactions that you'll end up seeing with those particular juveniles. Family, school, and now peers. For one thing, peers end up being able to provide a kind of reinforcement that aren't available. Peers also set up their own rules and convey their own information. Peers can shape behavior through the concept of peer pressure. It can get to the point that you can almost track a child's psychological development based upon the degree to which a child finds more credible the statement of peers than it is of parents. From the schools of developmental psychology, this notion reflects a separation of the individual as a subunit of the family into a person who has a separate or distinct personality. So there is a kind of a process of attenuation of the connections between the child and the family, so that ultimately the child becomes somewhat more self-contained and able to manage for himself or herself. Let me pause here on part 1 of the Chapter 4 lectures and pick up in a minute with more material from Chapter 4.